Ukraine shoots and it scores 3 times. In a massive hat-trick of attacks, Ukraine has sliced through Russia's air defenses like a knife through butter. The last line of Russian defense was broken, and Ukraine unleashed a hell that wiped out Russian air defenses that shouldn't have ever existed. Now they're gone forever, and Russia has to face up to the fact that it's more vulnerable than ever with its defenses wiped off the map. And it all started with Ukraine's Alpha Unit. Part of the SBU, or Security Service of Ukraine, the Alpha Unit has spent the last couple of years engaged in a massive campaign designed to cripple Russia's air defenses. These attacks set up the most recent Ukrainian hat-trick, which we'll get into as soon as we've explained the massive assist that the Alpha Unit provided to Ukraine's spectacular strikers. The news of the Alpha Unit's exploits come from Euromaidan Press and a Telegram post published by the SBU itself. In 2025 alone, the Alpha Unit managed to destroy roughly half of all Russia's Pantsir S1 air defense systems, at a cost of between $15 million and $20 million per unit. That amounts to a substantial hole in the Russian war machine's budget. But more importantly than that, the destruction of this huge number of Russian air defenses has opened up safer aerial corridors in both Ukraine and Russia that Ukraine is using to strike hard as part of its strategy of damaging the Russian rear to weaken offensives on the front. The SBU explains, noting that the Pantsir S1 is one of the most effective air defense systems that Russia has for countering the middle strike and long-range drones that are becoming increasingly important parts of Ukraine's arsenal. That is why the systematic destruction of Pantsir has a strategic goal: to break through the enemy's air defense and create corridors of hitting targets in the deep rear, the SBU says, adding, "This allows the defense forces of Ukraine to effectively work on military bases, warehouses, airfields, and other facilities of the occupiers." Imagine that it was a soccer match. Russia has built up a line of defenses, along with a goalkeeper, to stop Ukraine from scoring goals. The only way to get the ball in the back of the net once, never mind the 3 times that we're going to cover in a few moments, is to find a way around those defenses. Now, Ukraine could have engaged in complex passing moves, forcing the Russian defense to constantly shift until a temporary opening was created to allow a shot on goal, but Ukraine didn't do that. Instead, it just smashed through the defenders, taking them out of the game completely to leave itself with as many free shots on goal as it could ever want. Granted, the soccer analogy starts falling apart when the Russian defense gets blown to pieces. And blown to pieces is the perfect term to use, as the SBU isn't just claiming that Russia lost half of its Pantsir S1s. It has the receipts, shot from the perspectives of the very drones that the Alpha Unit used to take out so many of Russia's most important air defense systems. Published on YouTube by Euromaidan Press, the video shows the same thing over and over. The Ukrainian drone descends on its Pantsir S1 target. The air defense system, which is supposed to be capable of taking out drones, never sees what's coming, often because the drones fly so low that the Pantsir can't do anything about it. Impact after impact is recorded. Dozens of Pantsir S1s go down. The safe aerial corridors that Ukraine opened up created the shooting opportunities for Ukraine's hat-trick. Every single one of the strikes in that footage is important for Ukraine. Pantsir S1 is as important to Russia as the SBU claims. According to Army recognition, the Pantsir S1 is a mobile, medium-range air defense system that can be quickly transported to wherever it's needed on the back of a 10-ton Ural 5323 truck. That truck can travel for up to 800 kilometers or about 497 miles, and it carries an air defense system that has missiles that can fly for up to 12 kilometers or 7.4 miles and a 30mm gun with a range of between 0.2 and 4,000 meters or 0.65 to about 13,120 feet. It's the gun that may pose the biggest problem to Ukraine when it comes to the middle strike and long-range attacks that it wants to carry out. Though we've seen that the Pantsir S1 can be taken out when the air defense unit itself is the target, its ability to take out drones from as little as 0.65 feet away is a major problem when those drones are trying to hit something else. The Pantsir S1, perhaps more than any other Russian air defense system, is designed in a way that makes it capable of taking out low-flying and extremely dangerous drones that Ukraine deploys. Troops, military installations, and command centers can all be protected by this particular system, and its mobility means that it's also capable of moving with the soldiers and equipment that it needs to protect. And don't forget about missiles. Ukraine is increasingly using drone missile hybrids such as the Flamingo to attack Russian targets. Pantsir S1 units fire surface-to-air missiles and use guns to counter these kinds of threats, which potentially closes an avenue of attack for Ukraine. In other words, it's something of a jack-of-all-trades. The gun handles drones, and the missiles take out other missiles, as well as potentially destroying airframes that fly too close. That's why the Pantsir S1 has been such a prominent target for Ukraine and its Alpha unit. Now half of them are gone. That alone changes everything. And by the way, if this is the kind of insight you want to see more of, make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show. We break it down like this every single week. Onto the hat trick. We begin in the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula. With Russia's Pantsir S1 air defenses so thoroughly weakened, an opportunity opened up for a strike against a BK-16 transport ship that Russia had been using to shuttle troops from Crimea and into the occupied territories of mainland Ukraine. This ship wasn't a game-changing target for Ukraine, but it was a part of a massive mechanism that Russia uses to continue reinforcing its troop concentrations in the occupied territories. It's likely that many of those who made the trip from Crimea into Ukraine via this ship ended up on the front lines in places like Donetsk. Now, the ship won't ever work again. As Ukraine's General Staff reported in a Facebook post on February 14th, the ship was successfully hit as part of an attack that was likely a drone strike. The attack has been confirmed, with the General Staff noting that it was part of systematic measures to reduce the offensive potential of the Russian aggressor. And reducing offensive potential is precisely what Ukraine did, as the BK-16 is a problem causer for Ukraine. According to naval technology, this transport ship is crewed by 2 people but is capable of transporting a further 19 to wherever they need to go. It's fast too, capable of moving at a speed of 42 knots, which makes it capable of evading other ships and perhaps even the seaborne drones that Ukraine might have otherwise used to destroy the ship. Russia uses the ship for everything from coastal patrol to personnel transportation and coastal landings, making it an extremely versatile vessel. The BK-16 also presents a more direct threat than the transportation of troops into combat zones. The front section of the ship's upper deck has been configured so that it can store reconnaissance drones, such as Russia's Zala 421-16EM. It's likely not too much of a stretch to assume that the same storage area can also be used to store FPV drones and perhaps even long-range drones that Russia uses to attack Ukrainian territory. Drones can be launched directly from the upper deck of the BK-16, and those drones, assuming they're not on one-way missions, can also be recovered on the deck and then stored for later use. Any Ukrainian patrol boats or drones that encounter the ship may also have to deal with its armaments. The BK-16 isn't a powerful warship. It isn't designed to be. However, it still comes loaded with a gun carriage that enables the use of 7.62mm and 12.7mm machine guns, along with Russia's AG-17 30mm automatic grenade launchers and its 40mm grenade launchers. Mine countermeasures can also be fitted to the ship, and some variants are even armed with Kornet anti-tank missiles, which could perhaps be reconfigured to serve an attacking purpose on the water. Ukraine hasn't confirmed whether it struck the BK-16 at sea or if it hit the ship in its port. The latter seems most likely, which tells us that whatever air defenses Russia once had guarding the port weren't enough to stop Ukraine. For Russia, the loss of a BK-16 wouldn't be huge in any other context. The country still has a massive navy with more than 740 assets, but losing another ship to Ukraine is different. Based on where it was located, we can safely assume that the destroyed BK-16 was part of the Black Sea Fleet that was supposed to enable Russia to dominate the sea that lends its name to the fleet. The Black Sea Fleet has been humiliated by Ukraine. Highly effective Ukrainian naval operations, primarily using drones and missiles, have constrained the Black Sea Fleet to the point where it's close to being a non-factor in the war. Most of the fleet's ships are now trapped in Novorossiysk ports because it's too dangerous for them to attempt to project any sort of power in the Black Sea. Those that try become targets for drones and missiles. By February 2025, Russia had lost at least 24 warships from this fleet, amounting to about a third of the fleet's total size. It can't replace those ships. Turkey won't allow anybody to sail warships through the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits, both of which Turkey controls. Every loss of a ship in the Black Sea Fleet is a loss that weakens the only significant naval power that Russia could bring to bear against Ukraine, making the other 700 or so assets in the Russian Navy practically useless. Now a BK-16 has been added to the list of Black Sea Fleet casualties, and the first of Ukraine's hat-trick was scored. The brace was coming, as was the final goal that killed the game. We'll get to the last strike in a moment, but as for the second, Ukraine took advantage of Russia's dearth of Pantsir S1s to launch a strike against the type of target that has become key to Ukraine's entire long-range strategy, an oil terminal. For this strike, we head to the Krasnodar Krai region of Russia, wherein lies the settlement of Volga. Close to that settlement is the Tamaneftegaz oil terminal, which became a target for Ukraine on February 15th, according to Euromaidan Press. At least that's when Ukraine's General Staff took to Telegram to explain what the country's military had pulled off. In particular, the damage to the Tamaneftegaz oil terminal near the village of Volga, Krasnodar Territory, Russian Federation, has been confirmed. A fire was recorded on the territory of the facility, the General Staff reported. We don't know a huge amount about the strike beyond what the General Staff has shared, though we do know but the full scale of the damage was being assessed at the time of the Telegram post's publication. What we can tell you is that the oil terminal that Ukraine hit is located near the Kerch Strait, which the Kyiv Independent reports is east of the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula. Ukraine's drones would have had to travel at least a few hundred miles to reach Volga from the nearest Ukrainian-controlled territory of Nikopol, which only goes to emphasize how important the destruction of half of Russia's Pantsir S1 stock was. The longer the journey, the greater the risk. But Ukraine's drones traveled at least 325 kilometers or 200 miles and possibly more to score a direct hit on a Russian oil terminal. There was a nice little bonus for Ukraine in this second of its strikes. The General Staff explains it in his Telegram post, adding, "In addition, the enemy Pantsir S1 anti-aircraft missile and gun complex was successfully hit in the area of the village of Kacha." That village is in Crimea, and we're sure you've instantly taken notice of the air defense system that was hit. It was yet another Pantsir S1. The way things are going for Russia, it won't be long before the loss of half its Pantsir S1 stockpiles becomes the loss of 2/3, and then 3/4. Ukraine is clearly on a mission to wipe out this particular form of Russian air defense, and it's doing an amazing job of wiping them from the map. And that brings us nicely to the final strike of the hat-trick. If the attack on the BK-16 was a bullet header into the top corner of the net, and the strike on the Krasnodar Krai oil depot was a silky, smooth slotting of the ball into the bottom corner, the final goal in the trio was Ukraine scoring by smashing the ball right into Russia's collective face as a punishment for it ever thinking that it could play the same game as Ukraine. Strikes 1 and 2 were in annexed Crimea and Russia's own territory. Number 3 saw Ukraine take aim at its own land to show Russian occupiers that the near rear is far from safe. In truth, the final strike was more of a 1-2 pass that ended up in the goal, as it saw Ukraine take aim at 2 separate targets. What little we know comes from Euromaidan Press, which reports that Ukraine's drones scored a hit against the repair unit of one of Russia's artillery brigades in the settlement of Vilna, which is in the Donetsk Oblast. Ukraine followed that up by turning its sights to occupied Zaporizhia, where it scored hits against concentrations of troop personnel near the settlement of Lyubimivka. Again, the scale of the damage caused is still being assessed. However, it's the message that matters more here. With so many Pantsir S1s lost, Russia is no longer able to protect these types of vital troop concentrations. For instance, Ukraine wiping out an artillery repair unit in Donetsk means that Russia's degraded artillery can no longer fire. It's not like Russia's artillery was in good condition to begin with. As far back as early 2024, Forbes was reporting that Russia was yanking barrels of its old guns to replace worn-out barrels on its new guns. That can only be done for so long, especially as the older barrels will degrade even faster due to age and overuse. This is a systematic dismantlement of Russia's frontline effort, made possible by strikes in the Russian rear, which in turn were made possible by groups like the SBU's Alpha unit, opening up the safe aerial corridors that Ukraine's drones and missiles now traverse. Ukraine's strategy is brilliant. Russia has no answer for it, other than standing by and watching as yet more of its equipment gets ruined. So what is all of this going to mean for the future of the Ukraine war? As we've said several times, the destruction of so many of Russia's Pantsir S1s opens up what Canal 13 calls blind corridors in the air. In other words, these are portions of airspace over which Russia has no eyes. That's the often underappreciated aspect of air defenses. Yes, the guns and the missiles are supposed to take down incoming projectiles, but air defense systems also have radars, and those radars can at least provide some warning for troops on the ground, even if the air defenses fail. Where once warned Russian soldiers could try to get to cover before Ukraine's drones arrive, they're now vulnerable because their air defenses and the associated radars are dust. Just look at what happened in Zaporizhia. Russian troop concentrations were hit, and that might not have been possible if a Pantsir S1 were in the area. Worse yet for Russia, the crippling of its air defenses opens up strikes in the middle range, along with more of the long-range strikes that Ukraine spent most of 2025 proving that it can pull off almost at will. Remember, the Flamingo has taken flight. Ukraine's drone-missile hybrid offers the ability to strike deep into the heart of Russia, often in places where air defenses are non-existent. But for Ukraine to use Flamingo to its full potential, it needs to be able to get the weapon out of the far more congested airspace of Ukraine and into the places in Russia that it needs to strike. The SBU's actions have done that, at least on the Pantsir S1 front. Again, it's about safe aerial corridors. As long as Ukraine can keep those corridors open, its Flamingo missiles, which can travel up to 3,000 kilometers or a little over 1,800 miles, can navigate their way safely out of Ukraine and toward the targets that they need to hit in Russia. In terms of the middle range, we've seen what can happen there in Donetsk and Zaporizhia. Ukraine can't use FPV drones for the types of strikes it conducted in those occupied regions when it scored its hat-trick. It would also prefer not to use the more expensive long-range weapons like the Flamingo. when those are better used to take out targets inside Russia. Middle strike drones had to be made. Ukraine has them, with Metsa noting that these drones could soon replace HIMARS and similar weapons. With Russia's air defenses crushed by the Alpha unit, Ukraine's middle strike drones, which can be guided almost like FPV drones but can travel much further, are going to start wreaking havoc on Russian military nodes in the near rear, such as command posts, drone operating units, and, as we saw during the hat-trick, troop concentrations that might have been destined to launch assaults against Ukraine's defenses. And as Russia tries to deal with all of these battlefield calamities, there is one more problem: the sheer cost of what the Alpha unit has inflicted from a financial perspective. The one thing that the SBU didn't tell us is how many Pantsir S1s the Alpha unit has destroyed, outside of confirming that roughly half are gone. Back in October, Militani reported that Oryx, which is an analytics website, had confirmed the destruction of at least 35 Pantsir S1s. That number only accounts for the loss of units that can be verified using video or photographic evidence. But even if we take that October number as given, it means that Ukraine has cost Russia at least $700 million in Pantsir S1 units alone. That's part of the total of $4 billion worth of damage that the Alpha unit alone inflicted across all of Russia's air defenses in 2025. And you can see a huge financial burden that Russia has to overcome. A huge amount of Russia's air defenses have been wiped from the map. Now Ukraine is ready to strike deeper, harder. It's going to wreck the Russian rear, meaning that the hat-trick we saw between February 14th and 15th is likely going to be followed up by a demolition job on the Russian opposition. Russia's oil producers and refiners have to be worried. The oil terminal strike that was the second in Ukraine's February hat-trick is only the tip of the iceberg. Ukraine's long-range strategy has broken something big in Russian oil, and you can find out what that is if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show to see regular updates on the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you as always for watching.